What's going on, YouTube? We're back at it for another video. Today we've got the Democratic Detonation, the newest Warbond inside of Helldivers 2, and one that came with more than a few different weapons. Some a little bit more niche than others, but overall we went through, unlocked each one of them, and gave them a good stress test. And we'll be breaking down each one of them as we go through the video. But the biggest reason for breaking down each one of these weapons is giving you a better understanding as to whether or not this is going to be a Warbond that's worth you picking up. Some people may want to pass on this one, but hopefully by the end of the video you'll be able to understand whether or not this is going to be the Warbond you want to pick up and if some of these weapons are going to be worth your while. But that being said, let's jump straight in. Starting off first, we've got the BR-14 ADJUDICATOR, which is just absolute garbage. I'm not going to lie to you about this one. I'm not going to sugarcoat this one at all. This weapon is just underperforming and is not something I would say is going to be worth your while. The damage on it is a little bit over that of the Liberator Penetrator, but I'd almost argue that the Liberator Penetrator actually performs better than this weapon. The recoil with this feels very jarring as it will bounce randomly up and to the left or up to the right, and even in semi-auto, not just in the full auto mode for this weapon, it is extremely frustrating, especially with trying to land those weak spot shots on some of those Devastators with the automatons, and it just doesn't get any better when it comes to facing off with that of the THERMITE. With a low magazine capacity, that strange recoil pattern to it, and a lower fire rate, overall this weapon is just underperforming compared to every other weapon in the same category and even in that of the assault rifles. This one is definitely supposed to be some type of hybrid between the two that formulates a battle rifle, but ultimately just doesn't even hit the mark in my personal opinion, and ends up being one of those weapons where I am depleting the ammo quite quickly and not really finishing off a whole lot of enemies. Even though it's meant for medium-sized enemies, it just doesn't even feel like it hits that mark. But if you are going to use this, I would highly suggest using it only for the THERMITE, and even then, I still was not a huge fan of it. But let me know down in the comments below how you're feeling about it. Coming up right after that, we've got the R36 ERUPTER, which I will say is going to be something for a niche playstyle. This is definitely one for the snipers. It's a weird combination of that of the anti-material rifle along with the autocannon, but with an extremely slow rate of fire. Even slower than that of the Blitzer. But with this weapon, we'll have jet-assisted shells similar to that of the JAR 5, but when one of these shells does impact on the location that we're aiming at, or the enemy that we're aiming at, it will explode on impact and then shoot out shrapnel in almost a 360-degree radius, which can be quite nice, but sadly enough it can be one of those devastating factors to this weapon that does kind of hold it back, as this is something you definitely don't want to shoot at anything that's just in front of you or near some of your teammates. It can be quite deadly. Now it can one-shot Devastators, but that's if you do hit them in the weak spot, or in the case of firing at something like the heavy Devastators, sometimes the shrapnel can bounce back and hit the shield and then bounce back into the Devastator and creating that one-shot capability. It's not the worst when it comes to its overall damage output, but the damage output really gets hindered by the overall rate of fire. And 100% this is one of those weapons you definitely want to utilize by hanging back from the crowd. You want teammates with this one. I would not highly suggest utilizing this as a solo type of weapon, considering as soon as you have anything bum rushing up into your face, and if you've got multiple targets in your face, even if you do fire off and get that round into them without blowing that shrapnel back into your own face, it's going to be one of those moments where you're going to be chambering that round and more than likely getting completely overrun while you're just trying to get that next shell ready to fire. But with that being said, there are some utility factors to this weapon, considering it can actually close up bug holes and it can destroy fabricators from a good distance away. And with its explosive radius, it can be something that ends up having a little bit of a crowd control factor to it, either against that of the THERMITE or some of those smaller humanoid bots. It can take out the entire group of them as long as they're kind of clustered together. I wouldn't say that this is its strongest suited capability. And 9 times out of 10, I would not highly suggest utilizing this against that of the THERMITE, considering you're going to need something for that crowd control to deal with all of the enemies that will be overwhelming you, and more than likely in those situations, you won't always be able to hang back and utilize this weapon to its fullest capability, or as much as you will be able to when it comes to facing off with something like the automatons. But even then, you will be in a situation where you'll be basically relying on being as far away as you possibly can be with this weapon and allowing your teammates to kind of hold the line in the perimeter while you hang back and possibly even use something like a jump pack to get some higher ground and get that elevation to be able to get the angle on those enemies at a good distance away and try to pick them off before they get anywhere close. The handling isn't the worst with this weapon as well, but it is definitely the rate of fire that truly hinders this weapon overall. If they made this a little bit quicker When it came to its rate of fire, I might enjoy it a bit more, but overall it's really hard for me to justify utilizing this in my primary position, considering it almost completely handicaps you unless you're fully relying on your secondary or some type of support weapon in order to deal with the enemies that may be bum rushing you. So it's going to be up to your personal preference as to whether or not you're going to be able to sacrifice a primary weapon that can take out large packs of enemies in a quick succession, or a weapon that's basically going to be sit back, pick things off, but pick them off fairly slowly. Coming right after that, we've got the GP31 grenade pistol, which is going to basically be exactly what its name stating. It's just going to be a grenade launcher pistol. We'll have one fire from this every time that it's loaded. Now, strangely enough, right now, it has a bug where as soon as you first pull it out, you will be able to fire it twice, and then once you reload, it's just one grenade at a time. A little bit strange. I'd imagine they'll fix that in the coming future. But generally, the only purpose for this type of weapon is to destroy fabricators or that of bug holes. It does have a fair bit of damage to it, and it can take out some crowds, but you only get 8 rounds with this, and anytime that you pick up ammo for this weapon, you'll generally only get 1 grenade back unless it's the resupply from the stratagem, and with those boxes you'll only get 2 grenades back, so it won't be the most efficient weapon in order to deal damage or take out large crowds with. It's something that I believe may be able to half and half every once in a while, kind of utilize this one time to take out a crowd in front of you if you need be, but the rest of the time I'd see it more as something that was purely used for being able to take out fabricators or bug holes, and then be able to utilize your grenade slot for something like stun grenades or something that isn't going to have that capability of taking out the fabricators or that of the bug holes, and then alongside that having the capability of utilizing some type of support weapon or stratagems that don't have that same capability, but still having some type of weapon that can get the job done for you. Coming up right after that, we've got the G123 Thermite, which is going to be the worst item out of the entire Warbond. I was pretty excited to use this grenade as I thought it was going to be something that I would be able to fling onto a charger or a Bile Titan, and it would be able to burn through their armor or possibly even break their armor, and this just did not end up being the case. It does burn through the armor a little bit, but the damage is so minuscule that it almost feels like a huge waste to even use it. It can be finicky and clunky to even use as well. It's a slow type of toss, almost like a tomahawk, but it is a slow velocity going towards that target, and in some instances it can even bounce off of the armor, which is even more frustrating to have that thing just bounce off and be completely wasted. I've stuck 4 of these to a charger's face, it didn't end up killing them. I've stuck 2 to a leg of a charger, it didn't break their armor, didn't get them any closer to dying. Multitude of them towards Bile Titans and even heavily armored tanks, as well as Hulks, and it just didn't seem to do anything. They almost felt like they weren't even doing damage at all, which was really weird, and I was not a huge fan of this thing, and it really seems to me that every other grenade is performing at a much better rate than this Thermite, and you're just going to be better off using any of the other grenades over this for right now. Now, if anybody knows any tips or tricks on how to make this useful in some type of way, let me know down in the comments below, but as far as through my testing, I found this to be almost completely useless. Now, coming up last, we've got the CB9 exploding crossbow, which was my most fun weapon to use out of this entire Warbond, and it was because of the simple fact that it felt like a primary that was the grenade launcher I'd been looking for, or at least a variation of what felt like the grenade launcher that was a little bit easier to control and just outperformed that of the Punisher Plasma. With this weapon, you will have a large explosive radius to it, but the thing that kind of tones this thing down and doesn't make it overpowered is the simple fact that it only comes with 5 rounds per magazine, as well as a slow rate of fire. But if you're somebody that's comfortable with the rate of fire of some of the pump-action shotguns in this game, more than likely you'll feel quite comfortable with this one. And if you've enjoyed the grenade launcher in the past, this may be a weapon that you find just as enjoyable. Now, I'd make a strong argument that this is a weapon that you would more than likely only want to use when it comes to facing off with that of the Terminid. It's not the worst when it comes to facing off with the automatons, but it doesn't have stagger power, so you won't be able to bully those devastators, and it will take 4 rounds in order to take down some of those devastators unless you're able to hit that weak spot. But even then, with this crossbow, it's not going to be the easiest shot to make to land in that little center weak spot that they have on their chest. It does have the capability of taking down large groups of those humanoid bots by just shooting at the floor beneath them. What's crazy about this weapon is the blast radius from it is actually quite large. I didn't even notice it fully the first time I used it when I was facing off with the automatons, but once I went over to the Terminid side, this thing is a crowd control machine. Being capable of not only one-shotting the little ticks, but at the same time hunters, and not only that, it will one-shot the hunters within the blast radius. And in some instances, you may be able to get 5 hunters with just one shot of this, just shooting it towards the ground in the center of them and letting that blast radius be able to just completely destroy them. This is when I started to see this thing truly shine, where I started to utilize it as a crowd control weapon. And then from that point, it almost felt almost completely identical to that of the grenade launcher, just the only difference being a lower ammo capacity and a slower rate of fire. As from that point, I was able to basically utilize every other tactic that I'd used with the grenade launcher for taking down something like that of the charger and that of the bile type. Now when it comes down to taking down the charger, you will need to shoot underneath it towards that back end of that weak spot. It can be a little bit tricky to get that angle, but when you do get it, the blast radius is so large that I believe it's not only hitting that back weak spot, but it's hitting the back weak spot on the back inside of the legs as well. And sometimes this can absolutely melt those chargers. Similar to the way that you've seen from something like the Punisher Plasma, it can melt them fairly quickly, and I believe it's because it's hitting multiple spots with the blast radius. But it can sometimes be tricky to find those just right spots to land these shots in order to get that absolute melting power. The rest of the time, it won't seem as overpowered, but it will still get the job done fairly quickly. But when it comes down to taking down a Bile Titan, you will need something like the rail cannon of the 500 kg. What you're going to need to do is basically just open up that back armor on them, expose the weak spot on their back, not just the underside with the sacks. You'll need to hit that top weak spot, and not only is it going to work perfectly, it's something that I've had issues with the grenade launcher before, but it can get the job done and it can deal damage. It's not going to be the easiest route, but it is possible. But overall, this was basically the only weapon I was sufficiently pleased with in a way. It gave me the most fun factor out of it, but it's the only weapon that I found to be the most fun. It was one that I may start using in the future, but even then I still find that the Incendiary Breaker is going to be better for crowd control. The only reason I really have an affinity towards the Explosive Crossbow right now is because it is so closely related to that of the grenade launcher, just with a slower rate of fire and a bit of a different arc as well as different ammo capacity. But that's going to be everything from this Warbond. That's going to be all the weapons detailed out, giving you those tips and tricks on how to utilize some of them and whether or not they might be worthwhile for you to pick up. Let me know down in the comments below how you're feeling about some of these weapons. If you have picked them up, whether or not some of these may shine a little bit more, if there's any details I may not have given when it came to some of these weapons that you may have tested out with and found that I didn't end up actually being able to include inside of this video as it didn't come across while I was utilizing that weapon. Let me know down in the comments below. But overall, a little bit disappointing with some of the weapons, but in the end, I am still having fun with that of the Explosive Crossbow, and I more than likely will try to build something out for the Erupter. It's not the worst weapon, but at the end of the day, it is one that is a bit of a trade-off when it comes to your primary weapon, focusing more on having to rely on a fully built loadout that has something to compensate for the fact that your primary weapon is no longer capable of taking on large groups of enemies directly in front of you, and trying to rely on something like your secondary isn't exactly going to prove to be the best route in order to try and compensate for that. You will need some type of support weapon or stratagems to help in those moments, if not just fully relying on your team to back you up in those moments. With that being said, let me know down in the comments below how you're feeling about it, and if you'd like to see more content like this in the coming future, hit that subscribe button, and if you'd like to see some of this content live, hit that link down in the description below. Follow me over at Twitch. We'll be streaming daily. But on that note, have a good one.